Hi, welcome to the new Full Court Press podcast. For this first edition, we welcome Appeals Judge Roy McLeese and Superior Court Judge Alfred Irving Jr., co-chairs of the Civil Legal Regulatory Reform Task Force. They will discuss what the task force is, what they have already accomplished, and what lies ahead for this important initiative. Thanks to them both for participating. We hope you enjoy this chat.
I'm Roy McLeese. I'm a judge on the D.C. Court of Appeals. This is my 13th year, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Civil Legal Regulatory Reform Task Force, and I almost went to medical school instead of becoming a lawyer.
And my name is Alfred Irving. I am an associate judge on the D.C. Superior Court. I've been with the court since 2007, the first year as a magistrate judge, and I'm in my second term as an associate judge. I'm deputy presiding judge of the civil division, and I'm a co-chair of the task force.
The D.C. Court of Appeals and the Superior Court together created the task force to study and respond to a report that the D.C. Bar had done that was focused on access to justice issues in the courts, the difficulty people had in getting representation on really important matters. And the D.C. Bar had made a recommendation, had written a report recommending that the court kind of expand opportunities for non-lawyers to provide legal assistance to folks who are in need of that kind of assistance. And the courts stood up the task force and asked us to take a really deep dive into what people around the country are doing on this topic and what the perspectives of all the stakeholders in D.C., from the community to court users to court staff to legal aid, kind of the whole gamut, and the idea is that we're supposed to try to look into that and then make a recommendation to the D.C. courts about what should be done.
And the overall mission really is to close the access to justice gap. Both of the chief judges attended a conference in Santa Fe where they heard from jurisdictions who had already started to look at and implement programs with the notion of closing the access to justice gap. We're looking at all of those jurisdictions, programs they've implemented, and to the extent that they've conducted some evaluations and the like, we're looking at that as well. Well, we're now conducting, or we're finishing up outreach programs with the focus being having discussions with certain focus groups we've identified, starting with the Superior Court, Court of Appeals judges, the Board of Professional Responsibility, and a whole host of others. We're finalizing that, and we're morphing into online surveys among community organizations, the D.C. Bar membership, and others. So we're hoping that in gathering this information, it will inform ultimately a report with recommendations to the two chief judges.
Yeah, there are three big kind of types of proposals that we're most focused on considering. One of them, which has various names, is sort of taking people who you might think of as previously operating as paralegals and giving them additional training and testing and the like, and authorizing them to do things that really only lawyers used to be able to do. And they would be able to do that independently if they had adequate training and that had been kind of established. And that would be ideally, because they wouldn't have to have like a full law degree and all that, the idea would be that would be something that could be done at a lower cost. That's one of the models. Another model, which is sometimes called the community justice worker model, is to let folks who are not lawyers, and not necessarily even would have the skill set of paralegals generally, work under the supervision of lawyers, most typically perhaps inside of legal aid organizations and the like, to get specialized training to do particular tasks. And that might be done at really no cost. That could be a way of expanding the capacity of legal aid organizations to do work with a certain amount of resources that they have. If they could have, folks who could perform some tasks that don't necessarily require all the training of a lawyer, but still up to now have been the practice of law. And then the third thing that we're considering is the D.C. Court of Appeals rules has a provision which says that if you get the approval of the DC Court of Appeals or the DC Superior Court for a special project, you can also have folks who are not lawyers do things that are ordinarily the practice of law. And the other thing that we're considering is trying to encourage kind of innovation by having folks, broaden the awareness of that and have folks think, how can we use, what kind of programs can we create that will be innovative, that will help, provide legal assistance at a, no cost or lower cost for folks who, on critical issues are not able to get it right now.
Well, the community justice workers are working now in jurisdictions such as Alaska, I believe Utah, and we're also looking at Arizona because they've stood up a program that allows paraprofessionals or specially licensed individuals to work in certain practice areas such as family law and certain areas, particularly in Arizona, where there is a dearth of attorneys assisting folks in special legal matters.
Yeah, there are also a number of jurisdictions like ours that are actively studying that, and so they're in various stages of the process. Texas, quite recently, kind of has preliminary approval to do a model that would both be kind of the community justice worker model, but also the licensed paraprofessional model. So, and if you look outside this country in Ontario, Canada, there's been a program of the kind of paraprofessional type that's been very large for decades now. And so there are places around the country or adjacent where this has been done, but I would say it's not yet widely implemented. There is a big movement, and the trend is to try to implement things along these lines, but it's not yet widely implemented.
Well, there's not a whole lot of pushback, at least in this jurisdiction, because we're just underway with the work. I think what we all recognize is that there are so many litigants who are self-represented, and we also know that with a certain amount of specialized assistance, they fare much better in court. They come better armed with the facts that they need to present, and to the extent that there are laws that support those facts, they might prevail, when otherwise, in some of the cases, they're going up against lawyers. And so they're better, there's a balance struck with some type of assistance in certain cases. With respect to the community justice worker, the appeal there is many of these folks perform work as social workers, and they're out in the community already. And so with a certain amount of training and supervision, they can add a second level of support for the individuals that they're supporting in various situations. For example, if they're appearing already or assisting people who are wards of the court, and a guardian or a conservator has been appointed to assist them, then they can provide some additional work or support, legal support for those individuals. So the service then become much more comprehensive, so they're not only dealing with certain social aspects, but to the extent that they need a divorce or a separation of some sort, they might be able to supply that type of legal support, and for no cost, we hope.
And as far as obstacles go, particularly the option that involves licensed paraprofessionals, there is a lot of practical difficulty in that. I mean, there would have to be tests generated to make sure that people have the relevant qualifications, and there would have to be like who is going to do those tests and who is going to grade them. So there are a lot of practical obstacles in kind of creating a whole structure to support a program like that from kind of the ground up, because we don't really have, I mean, pre-existing entities that are focused on any of that. So there are a fair bit of kind of practical obstacles in standing that up and figuring out exactly like what kind of training would they need, what kind of education would they need, who would design the tests, who would grade the tests, do they have to have malpractice insurance? There are just many, many complicated issues, some of which would require resources, so that's always also an obstacle. So there are a number of challenges. I don't know if you have to call them obstacles, but certainly challenges that you need to confront.
At least from my perspective, because I know that at the Court of Appeals, perhaps half of your litigants are self-represented. In the civil areas of the court, for example, probate, family court, and the civil division, we see regularly, daily, self-represented litigants. And so if they're already receiving services of sorts, and there's a model to stand up that requires little cost, there's a win-win. And so if we can ensure that 20 people receive some additional legal support where otherwise they'd have to go it alone, in my view, that's a win. Some folks are already receiving legal support through legal aid and other entities. There are pro bono entities, other pro bono entities that are providing services. They're just not meeting the need. And so if we can stand up a model that supplement or complements the services some litigants are receiving, and others can then join the pool of folks who are receiving legal support, then in my view that is a win.
I'd say in the short term, success is the task force doing a good job of finishing the process of getting all the information we can gather from around the country, from our stakeholders and court users and unrepresented folks, so that we can write a good report that's helpful to the DC courts so they can decide what to actually implement. So that's kind of the short-term goal. I do feel optimistic and hopeful that we'll be able to make recommendations for changes that the courts will ultimately implement, and that's where longer-term success is. I mean, it's a big problem. It's a huge problem. It's, I don't know, tens of thousands of unrepresented folks in really important matters in Superior Court and in the Court of Appeals. And really, there's nothing that the task force of the courts can do immediately is going to fully solve that. But I do think that some of the options have pretty good promise to make a real dent, a significant dent, in getting assistance to folks who can't get it now, either at a much reduced cost or kind of expanding the ability of pro bono and other entities to provide services, so that on really important matters like eviction or civil protection order type cases and the like, folks will be represented.
Well, I know that we have an excellent, hardworking task force, people who are very devoted to this area of access to justice, and we meet virtually every 2 weeks, and people are with us, we're with them. They come with so much knowledge. They've been studying the issue for years. And so I think we at least have as much human power as we need more, but we have at least enough to get us off the ground and working towards a report and recommendation.
Yeah, that's a great final message, is sort of to thank the members of the task force. They're all appointed by the court. Some of them are court staff or judges, but a number of them are just members of the DC legal community who all have day jobs and are very busy, and many of them are very expert in the areas that we're looking at, and many of them have spent hundreds of hours already trying to help the task force get its head around these problems and figure out the information that it needs and what recommendations would be good. So thanking the task force is a great final thought.